You have a piece of maple like this, and you want to do something with it. Usually some dye and some shellac. That's what you got. Now, the same board, but you don't want to use any dye. You just want to use shellac. That's what you got. Now, it's not only shellac. It's shellac, oil, and wax. What it is. I'll pass these around. Those have been banged around a lot, so there's some spots on the finish that needs to be redone, but you get the idea of it. Got a couple more of those, just little sample pieces you can pass around. If you don't know what shellac is a very, very old product. I can't tell you how many hundreds of years they've been using it.
Testing.
It's made from the secretion of a lac bug, female lac bug. It's primarily found in India and Thailand. And they scrape it off the trees, refine it. I'm not going to do that. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yeah, there's some that won't hear you, so.
Come on up closer. You're the only one.
Don't want to get that close.
Yeah, I'll try this thing, but I
Just put it around your neck. Just put that around your neck.
is that
Oh, yeah.
is that good enough?
Oh, yeah, it's way better.
Wow.
Okay.
Awesome.
Put it
Oh, sir, what you building?
You didn't get anything. Anyway, they scrape it off the trees, they melt it down, they refine it, lay it in the sun, let it dry, they break it up in pieces, they do it all over again, lay it out in the sun, let it dry. They keep refining it down and down. The more times they go through it, the clearer and lighter color it becomes. The dark button lac is the darkest, and button lac, it's not used very often. It still has a lot of impurities in it, a lot of bug parts in it. They don't get all of it out. The next step down would be garnet, and then orange, then it goes on down to blonde, super blonde. The more they refine it, the clearer it gets and the lighter color it gets. This, I just mixed this up yesterday. That's garnet. That's super blonde. Super blonde is pretty clear. The way it's mixed, these flakes that I'm passing around, you see how they come. You mix those in alcohol. And you mix it in different cuts, whatever works best for you. And by a cut, that's how many pounds of flakes you add to 1 gallon of alcohol. So a 2-pound cut is 2 pounds of flakes to 1 gallon of alcohol. You're never going to mix that much of it up. So reduce that down. Like I have a chart that I use. If I only want to do a pint, which is what's in this jar right here, it's 8 ounces of alcohol and 2 ounces of flake. So you're never going to ever mix up a gallon. And dude, you don't want to mix up any more than you're going to use right away. They say that it has a shelf life after it's mixed of about 6 months. Well, I've used it a lot. It's been mixed longer than that, but not a lot longer than this. So you don't want to mix up a lot more than you're going to use. And to speed up the mixing of it, if you just put the flakes into a container and add the alcohol to it, it takes quite a while for the flake to dissolve.
Yeah.
So what I've done,
Looks like we're
I'm not the only guy that does this,
somehow, doesn't it?
I use a coffee grinder.
Hey, this works good.
And it works pretty good. Doesn't take very long. This is my own coffee grinder, by the way, that stays in the shop. I don't use my wife's.
That's why you're still married, right?
It really wouldn't hurt anything. If you did. But it dries it pretty quick. Jim brought up a good question there, I was going to tell you about. You measure out alcohol. I just use a measuring cup, measure out the alcohol. To weigh the flakes, I use a real inexpensive food scale. Not even a digital scale. Just use one of these little scales like that. I can pour my flakes in there and weigh it out. Very simple. Now, I didn't bring stuff to mix today, because it takes it a while to dissolve anyway. But I did bring this that I mixed yesterday. I'm going to pass this around. Don't shake it too much because the lid might leak around that edge. It'll just make your hands pretty sticky. Now that will get a lot clearer in probably another day or so. Shellac can be applied different ways.
Hey, Mike,
Yes.
tell them your trick for determining whether your shellac is too old or not.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was telling Bill the other day, excuse me, if you've had shellac mixed up for a while and you're not sure whether it's still going to be good or not, take a piece of glass. Just take your shellac and put just a couple of drops on a piece of glass and let it sit. In 12 hours, if it's not hard, your shellac's no good. It'll never dry. If it gets hard within 12 hours, it's still good. Usually, it won't take it that long if it's still good. But you gotta use a piece of glass. Okay, to apply shellac, you can do it different ways. It can be padded on with a rag. That's primarily called French polishing when you do that. You might have heard of French polishing. It's a little difficult to do it that way. You have to learn how to do it. You can brush it, which is the most common way to do it, or you can spray it. I spray shellac on small projects. I use one of these little automotive touch-up guns. Works great. Works great for small projects. To brush it on, you want to use a good China bristle brush. I'll pass these around. These brushes, I order these from a finishing place in North Carolina. These are pretty expensive brushes. However, locally, Von Tobel's carries this brush. And it is a good brush. I think I paid $12 for this brush. And it's a great brush for shellac.
What are the brands of those?
I was afraid you was going to ask me that. The one that I order is called Top Sail. Corona Top Sail. Right. The ones that Von Tobel has, you'll find them on their end cap rack or Worcester. There's white China bristle, which is what this is, and there's a black China bristle. The black is a little stiffer than this. And I like the white one better than the black one. The black seems to maybe leave some brush marks, a little harder to get out. So the white is better. Now to get back to those pieces that I passed around, those sample pieces, to get to that color, I use aniline dye. Now there's different aniline dyes. There's Transfast, which is a powder. You can mix it in distilled water or alcohol. I like to mix it with the water because it doesn't dry quite as fast. It's easier to work with. If you mix it in alcohol, it dries really fast. I mean, really fast. So I use the water to mix mine. Then there is trans tint. This is a liquid, and it's very, very, very highly concentrated. Takes just a couple of drops. Doesn't take very much of it. This will mix also with water, also with alcohol. What I use this for a lot, it will mix with lacquer, with clear lacquer, to make a tinted colored lacquer. So you can spray lacquer and color. If you're trying to match something that you already have, that's an easy way to do it. This is what it is. This is trans tint. You might want to come up, I don't want to pass these around. You might want to come up, you can look at it, hold up the light, you can see it a lot better. That's what it is.
Can you mix those with shellac too, or?
No. Mix it with, that goes on first. Put the aniline dye on, you've used aniline dye, but put aniline dye on first. Then you follow that with tung oil. And when you put the tung oil on, man, does that start to pop figure of wood. Then when you put the shellac on it, I mean, just really brings it alive. I'm going to show you here real quick. This little sample, now, this one first of all has just the dye on it. This one has dye and a coat of oil, a coat of tung oil. Now I'm going to put a little bit of shellac on here. See that? You see the difference? I don't know if you can see it or not. I put shellac on one end, not on the other. That's just one coat. And it'll dry really fast. 20 minutes, you can put another coat on. And after about 3 coats, then I would very lightly sand it. And I would sand it with like a 180, 220, something pretty fine. And all you want to do is scuff sand. And I mean just knock any fuzz off of it. If it is for, let's say for example, a piece of furniture, say a tabletop or something like that, I would oil varnish over top of it. It's not very water resistant, and definitely is not alcohol resistant. So you do need to put something over the top of it. Small projects like this box, I mean, for small projects, shellac is great. This is shellac and wax on these boxes. That's all it is.
So you can put like polyurethane over shellac?
Sure. You can put, shellac is a great sealer. You can put anything over shellac. Shellac is a good sealer. You can put lacquer over it. You can put anything over shellac. It's great if you're going to paint a project and you have a knot, for example. You want to seal that knot. Shellac it first, then paint over it. If you use MDF for anything, you want to paint MDF, well, you know the edge is going to soak up a whole lot more than the surface. Shellac it. Put about 3 coats of shellac on that edge, then put your paint on, you won't see any difference in it at all. Shellac is a great sealer. And waxes, after I use shellac, I usually use wax. The two that I like is Johnson's paste wax and Minwax's finishing wax. This is a little harder wax, will last a little longer than Johnson's, but Johnson's is good. What else I can tell you here? There's 3 real good books that I like. I like all 3 of these books. Ian Hosker's book, he's from the United Kingdom, he's from England. It's a little hard to understand him sometimes, but he has some really good points in it. And of course, Jeff Jewett's book, everybody knows, if you read Fine Woodworking or any of it, you see Jeff Jewett's articles all the time. This is the simplest book that I have ever seen on finishing, and it's all kinds of finishes, and it's so easy to understand. Fine Woodworking put out this one. I don't know if it's still available or not. I don't remember what, 2011. There's a great article in here that Peter Gedry did. If you remember, Peter was a pro that we had here a couple of years ago. Peter's got a great article in here about using shellac. And I think you can still get this from Fine Wood. You'd have to order it from Fine Woodworking, but I think Taunton still has that available.
Hey, Mike, can shellac be, say you're working on a piece of wood and you're going to stain it, and usually the end grains will pick up the stain a lot darker than the surfaces. Can you use shellac to go ahead and
Yes.
seal those ends?
Yes, wash coat it once.
Okay, and then will the
I wouldn't
stain-
build up, yeah,
will the
it'll
stain-
still take, I wouldn't put more than one coat on though.
Okay, but the stain will cover,
You would want to seal it and you want to sand it good. But yeah, yeah, you can definitely do that, definitely seal.
Is that more or less what that sanding sealer stuff is? I don't know what. that
No,
is.
not really, no.
That's something.
You're talking about a latex, or I mean, a lacquer sanding sealer.
Oh, is that what they are? They're a lacquer?
Most of them are lacquer based, yeah.
Okay.
There is a shellac sanding sealer, right?
I'm sure there are. There is, that, what's it called, bins, 1, 2, 3, or whatever. That's a white shellac is what it is. You can also buy shellac pre-mixed. You don't have to mix it with flakes. That's the most economical way. But you can buy it. Zinsser, you'll see this on the shelf all the time. I got this at Bob Holes. You want to be careful. This is not a de-waxed shellac. This will have some wax in it, which is okay, but you can't put a lot of other finishes over top of this one. This is the same. This spray. This is great for small projects. This is great. You're not going to put anything else over it. You're going to use just shellac. It's great. But they have one. The can looks just about like this. So across the top it says seal coat. And the seal coat is de-waxed shellac, which would be the same as these flakes, pre-mixed. One thing to be very conscious of, though, in the metal containers, if you don't use it in 6 months, I wouldn't try to use it after that. You always want to store shellac in a glass container or plastic, and you want to store it where it's not in the light. Put it in a cabinet someplace where it's dark. Cool is better. Doesn't have to be, but cool is better. But keep it where it's dark. It'll last and last and last and last. I keep mine in a cabinet, and I used it. It's been mixed a couple of years ago. I still use it. Bill was over the other day, and I showed Bill one a jar that I had. When did I mix that, Bill? Was it in 2010?
yeah, something like that.
It was still good. So if you keep it in the dark, it'll last a long time. I talked about using varnish over the top of it to finish it. This drawer front has been varnished. This was shellacked, of course no wax, but shellacked. Then I brushed an oil coat or an oil-based varnish on that. Any other questions? Anything else I can?
Hey, Mike, you want to build a optimal depth to a finish. Is it good to go with multiple layers of shellac before you finish with stuff or top coat?
The more you put on it, the deeper it'll get. You saw those samples.
Yeah.
I think I've got about 6 coats of shellac.
It'll finish faster and clearer looking than about anything else you do.
It will. Yeah, as long as you use the real clear finishes. like blonde or super blonde. Now the darker ones, this garnet that I passed around, that or orange, those will color the wood as well. I mean, you can take a raw piece of wood with no dye, no stain, and just use a colored shellac, a darker shellac. It'll pick up that color good.
Do they get muddy looking at some point?
No, not really, not really.
You have a problem with matching colors, like you say you start something and you want to match that shellac, do they match again if you do the same?
If you're using the colored shellac, yeah, you
I
can
mean,
say.
it's just that blonde, you mix
Oh.
it up, it's going to be the same color.
It is clear. When you put that blonde on, it is clear.
If you start a project and then mix them up later,
You've got to put a color down first. If you're going to use the clear, the blonde
you
shellac,
have to put a dye.
you've got to use, well, it's something. You can use stain, you can use dye.
Well, unless you don't want a color, right?
Now, if you don't want a color,
Polyurethane will just pop the color off the color.
but you can't patch into polyurethane.
What was that?
Can't patch it without taking it off.
Oh. Yeah, I realize that,
Yeah.
I'm saying, just poly will just pop the wood colors for you.
Yeah.
So shellac does do the same exact thing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Other than brushes that you ordered, is there any of this stuff that you can't get easily here at Von Tobel or?
No, that's why I passed that one brush around that I got from Von Tobel. I love that brush. That's a great brush. That's really a good brush.
But other than brushes, or is there anything that's a special stuff you gotta get ordered, or you just,
The shellac flakes,
where you get
you
that?
have to get those. You can't buy them locally. Nobody has them here. I buy them from Rockler or Woodcraft, either one. Joe?
If you had, I use wiping rags to put most finishes on.
Yeah.
My aunt was a shop teacher and the kids
Okay.
couldn't afford expensive brushes, so
Sure.
she showed me a technique of rolling like t-shirt material, you make your own little brush out of it. There's no streaks, there's no, and obviously you don't have to clean the brush, you just throw it.
Okay, that's good. That's a good point. That's called rubber, by the way.
Oh,
For rubber. It's for rubbing the finish on.
Oh.
And you start with a piece of cheesecloth. You make a ball out of cheesecloth, small ball, maybe the size of, say, a tennis ball. Okay. Then stretch soft white cloth over that. You don't want to use anything that's heavy. Use thin cloth. I've read some guys' articles. They say an old bed sheet that's been washed 100 times is the best piece of cloth you can use for rubbing on shellac. But you make a pad, cover it with that. You don't soak the pad, but you dampen the pad. And then you wipe it on. And as you wipe it on, you put more pressure on it until you have to re-moisten the ball again. But it's great, holds fin, but it's hard to do. It's a knack you gotta learn. It's not really easy to do that way, but it does work. Brushing is the easiest. Unless you want to spray it. Spraying is the easiest.
How do you clean brushes?
Alcohol. It's an alcohol base. It's mixed with alcohol, so you do all your cleanup with alcohol.
I've heard some people don't clean their brush, they just leave shellac on it.
You don't have to clean it. If you got a designated brush like I have, this is a brush I use all the time. It's never had any, it's never been used for anything but shellac. I never clean it. Get done with it, lay it down, it dries, it doesn't matter. Before I use it the next time, I pour a little alcohol in the cup, that brush in there for just a couple of minutes. Clean up the brush, I'm ready to go. Softens it that quick. As long as you're just using it for shellac, you don't use it for anything else.
Yeah, I'm liking that.
Yeah.
I like the sound of that.
On that technique, Mike, would you keep a separate brush for your different colors?
Don't really need to. No, you don't need to. I never do. I use the same brush for everything.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, I might use it for garnet today and super blonde tomorrow. Doesn't matter. The alcohol takes it right out. Anybody else? Well, I hope I taught you something about shellac, and I hope I made some of you decide to try to use shellac. Because I'm telling you, once you use it, you're going to wonder why you haven't done it before.
And I said I would like to talk a little bit about alternatives to staying, some of the things that I've been doing recently. You remember Dan invited us over to the forestry department at Purdue. And the one thing that I remember from that particular talk was going out in the hallway and looking at the different displays. And the thing that amazed me was if you look at Indiana and you look at all the trees in Indiana, the most common things are red oak and white oak. Together, they're about 45% of all the trees in Indiana, volume-wise. So I thought, well, why don't we use more of these woods? You see stuff that people bring in, there's never oak in here, hardly ever. And so I started researching that a little bit and started thinking, you know, why don't we do that? If you go back a century ago, Stickley was around and they had all the arts and crafts. You're okay? Yeah. You had all the arts and crafts around. Why don't we do that? And why don't we use particularly white oak, which is what they used? One of the things I did was just look around at what I'd made in the past. And I brought this in a couple years ago, so it's had a chance to age. And when I look at this white oak, it's got a little bit of walnut. I got to conclude that that doesn't look very nice. And maybe that's part of the reason that we don't use it more. And then I thought if I look at Mission or Arts and Crafts, it doesn't look like that at all. The white oak looks something like this, which at least to me aesthetically is a lot prettier than kind of the orangey dull that you get with white oak. So I started researching how did those guys do it? And back around 1850, people knew that in barns where they used an English oak, the oak turned dark, and it turned dark very quickly. And they said, why is that the case? And why is it such a pretty brown color? And it was because the animals lived there, and the urine gave off ammonia. So if you look at what Stickley did at the turn of the 20th century, almost all the stuff he did, he started out by fuming, by putting ammonia on it to change the color, and then he did a few other things. But I thought, why don't I give that a shot and see what happens? So one of the things that I've been doing recently is making a lot of these just bracelets. I made a couple dozen and gave them out to people. So I made one out of white oak because I can do one in less than an hour very easily. And I thought, ammonia. Where am I going to get some ammonia? So I thought, oh, Windex. So I got a jar and I put the Windex in the bottom and I suspended the bracelet of white oak. And the next day I looked at it and it was just sort of an ash and gray color. It looked pretty bad. So I left it in for another day and it still looked terrible. I finished it, it still didn't look that great. So I started reading and I found out that you really need concentrated ammonia to make it work. And I thought, okay, where am I going to get ammonium hydroxide solution 28 to 30%? Maybe there's a chemical supply house or something around here, but if I go there, maybe the police will come to my house to see if I'm cooking meth. So I'm thinking, what do I do? And if you think about where do you get something, you don't know where to get it. And suddenly I realized, oh, I can do that. The next day, I had a box sitting on my front porch that had a little smiley Amazon face on it. 30% ammonia. One thing I'll say about that is though, if you try fuming with 30% ammonium hydroxide, it's extremely dangerous and you need to know what you're doing. It's corrosive, it will burn your eyes, it will burn your lungs. You need to wear gloves and you need to wear goggles because even the vapor getting in your eyes can damage them. And the best thing to do is work outdoors or work someplace where you have a fan moving air in one direction and stay upwind from it. But I did try it. I took a couple of pieces of white oak and I stuck them together. And I turned this thing, didn't take very long. And I put it in with, it was actually into a bucket. And I put a couple of shopping bags in there, filled those up with a little bit of that solution. Put a stand in there, put this on top, and after 24 hours or less than 24 hours, this is what it looked like. You can contrast that with what you see here. No problem with the finish. If you look at all the problems that Mike was talking about, if you buy stain to try to color wood, what happens? You've got a suspension of particles, basically. It's a dispersion. You've got blotching, you've got running, you've got drips. People say wipe it off, you wipe it off, you don't get enough color. Then you have to put 3 coats on, and then of course you've got the problem of the end grain, which Mike was talking about. What do? Put shellac on or thin it? It never matches. This is all the same color. I didn't have to touch it. The ammonia just turned it, the fuming took place, and there it is. Much more attractive, I think. So I'll pass this around, you can take a look at it.
Does that work on only one specific wood?
That's a really good question, and at least the research I've done suggests that white oak has much more tannin in it, and tannin's what's reacting with the ammonia, than even red oak. Some of the literature I looked at suggested red oak got kind of a greenish color, and that some people actually put tannic acid on before they fume to get more color. Butternut supposedly is okay, cherry is okay for this. I've tried it on maple. Didn't really work very well. I think probably white oak would be the number one thing, but if it's 20% of the volume of trees in Indiana, it should be readily available. So the next thing I did was think, okay, I've got these nice little patterns here with walnut and white oak. Why don't I take something like this, and before I fume it, I'll mask it off with tape, and I'll make all kinds of neat designs in it. In this one in particular, I usually alternate the layers when I do these turnings. And I didn't on the top layer. My daughter pointed that out to me before I even started working on it. She said, "Dad, why did you glue it up that way?" So I thought, okay, I'll just cover that up by putting tape over it. And then I also had a tracing of a flower, so I could just take some painter's tape and put it on the bottom here because there's a big open space. So I put the tape on very carefully, and I fumed it, and I was all excited, thinking, okay, when I take that tape off, I'm going to have a nice pattern. I took the tape off, you couldn't even see where the tape lines were. Ammonia is a very small molecule, it goes through anything. And as I researched more, I found you can't put varnish on and hope that it won't go through, it goes through everything. The one thing it won't do is it won't penetrate, at least quickly, and I turned the bottom of this after I had fumed it, so you can see inside it's actually lighter color, and if you looked at it, you could get an idea of how deeply it penetrated. I got the impression that if you let it fume forever, it might go all the way through a piece of wood, but if you just fume it for maybe a day or two, it might go 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch. But the advantage is, if you want to sand this or do something with it, you're not going to get the color off. If you had a chair and you made a rug out of it, instead of like using some sort of a coating to color it, maybe a stain, if someone put their feet on it, it's not going to rub off. So there are definitely advantages to this, but again, it's kind of limited in terms of what wood you can use. So I don't know if you have any questions about fuming at this point. Yes?
I will say Peter Galbert, author of the Chairmaker's Notebook, does his fuming with just straight household ammonia and tints it over with Visqueen, and the stuff looks great, at least on the pictures. So, and by the way, you can get concentrated ammonia at Blueprint Supply.
Yeah. That was another thing people suggested if they're printing, that they use a lot of ammonia. But I've read different things. Some people say, as long as you got the ammonia present, if you can wait long enough, it will turn. And then others say, if you want to really get the nice color, you need to do it quickly with a high concentration. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. My experience was it worked a lot better with 30% than it did with Windex.
Peter goes about 2 days. Boy, the chairs look fantastic.
Another thing I read was that different white oaks will respond differently. So if you take white oak from 2 different trees and try to put it together and fume it, the color may not match. The suggestion is use the same wood from the same tree if you can. Yes?
Now, is this vessel all white oak?
100% white oak.
And why is that? Because
The reason it's dark on the bottom is this is all essentially face grain here, whereas in the bottom it's one solid piece, so I have end grain, so I'm going to have darker and lighter. Now, if I use just regular stain, this would probably be black. If you look carefully, you can still see the different colors, and the grain comes out pretty nicely, so it's definitely better than using our traditional stain, but it's always going to be darker because you see those pores and you have more of that surface, and that's why it's dark. But that's a good question. Yes?
If it's so costly, what do you do for disposal?
I've read people saying you should just pour it down the toilet. In my case, I didn't use very much material, and I didn't have any pets or children around. I had an open area. After a day, it was all gone. But probably a better way to dispose it would be to dilute it and pour it down the toilet, something of that nature. Some people have said, oh, you have the ammonia and now you have to put an acid on it to neutralize it. But the ammonia is a gas. The one thing I did note, that vessel that you're passing around was kind of closed at the top. It took probably over a day for all the ammonia smell to go out. So if you do fume something, leave it in a well-ventilated area or outside for a day or so to make sure all that ammonia is gone before you do anything with it. Yes.
Did you notice the wood getting softer at all when you first took it out of the ammonia?
The only thing I noticed was, because it was a very humid environment, because you have a water solution with the ammonia coming out, there is a little bit of grain raising, very slight. I think in my case, I just used some of this 320 stuff that I really like, this 3M stuff. That took care of it. And I didn't have to worry about sanding through the color because it is very, very deep. You could probably go, 120 grit and still not get to the bottom of the color. Yes?
I just thought of another way to get rid of that. Save it till spring, and after your sweet corn gets about this tall, dilute it, pour it down the road.
Yeah.
There we go.
Well, the farmers use anhydrous, and there are furniture shops that use anhydrous ammonia to do fuming of white oak. Yes.
What type of setup do you use for fuming? Do you use like a trash can and put the ammonia in the bottom and suspend the bowl?
For this, I thought, okay, I'm going to use one of those 5-gallon pails that you get drywall compound or paint in. Oops, this is a little bit too big in diameter to fit down. I go, okay, now what do? I found a flower pot that was bigger. I just use a garbage bag.
Okay.
But I put it outside when I do it, and I'm careful where the wind is coming from, so I'm staying upwind, because again, it is very dangerous. You want to be careful. Okay, I want to move on to topic number 2. We're talking about how alternatives to stain, all the problems that Mike was talking about with stain. And Mike was talking about using dyes. When Peter Gedries was here a couple of years ago, the one thing that I took away from it was the guy doesn't use stain. If he colors wood, he uses dye. And he talked about, you guys should think about using dyes. And I looked at the receipt on this. Lockwood is what he recommended back in 2013. And I contacted Lockwood and they said, oh, if you want to get started, we'll send you 5 1-ounce packets. You just pick out what kind of color you want and we'll send it to you. Little do they know that 1 ounce of this stuff probably lasts me the rest of my life. So I'm in great shape. So I tried different colors. That bracelet that I held up, I used kind of a bluish green. You don't have to use a wood color. Very similar to what Mike said, you put it on. I use just a sponge like this. Make up the batch, and you might want to test it, but you can use different intensities to get different intensities of color. And when I wipe it on, first I dampen the wood. I finish it maybe down to 180 grit, and then I wet it with water using my sponge, and then very lightly sand down. And then I just dip the sponge into the solution, squeeze it out a little bit, apply it, and when you apply it, you're going to get lap marks. And what I do is I just put a second coat on, and I put the center of my sponge right over that lap mark, and the lap marks are completely gone. If you see a slight lap mark when it dries, it'll be gone. Don't worry about it. And then it's just a matter of what's the intensity of color that you want. I've got a bunch of things up here. People ask me why. Well, this one is over a year old. It's figured maple, and that's the best thing to use for dyeing wood, I think. And you see that used extensively. It works much better than stains do. This is undyed, and this is kind of a yellow. It varies a little bit. You get different colors of curly maple or figured maple. But that's just an example, and then the question is, what do you like? This is just a little bit very, very light. Enough that it brings out the striations, the stripes. Some people like it a little bit darker. And then if you look over there at that piece that I brought in, I think it's the biggest one over there, it's a little darker, and you can see probably across the room the stripes. Some people like the stripes to be almost black. But it's just a matter of how concentrated you want it to be, and I find just putting one double coat on takes care of it. It looks awful when you get done, Michael attests to that. It looks terrible, but as soon as you put finish on, it just pops. So it's a matter of, what do you want to do, but you're getting around a lot of the issues that you have with stain. And when you're doing something like this, everything here is face grain. I don't have any end grain, so I don't have any problems with the dye on the end grain. But if I get end grain, obviously, with something with water, and that's just going to go right in and darken quite a bit. So that's another alternative to using stains. And then the last thing was, and I think that was the thing that Dan was curious about, the piece over there, how do you get that finish? And there are really only three ways that we finish wood. At least I put them in three categories. You got oils and waxes, which aren't very durable, but you can repair really, really easily. You've got what I would call solvent type materials, which would be the old style lacquer and shellac that Mike talked about. Those materials, you've got a solvent, you can build them up and you can just replace it because they stick together and they form one coat, that's it. And then there are cross-link types, and the cross-link types, you form a separate coat, it dries, and then you have another coat, so there's always layers that you're putting on. And then you have the problem of sanding through if you sand between coats. And in the case of the cross-link type, you've got things like phenolics, you can use epoxies, but the most popular is urethane. And the reason for that is you can do so much chemically because there's so many different raw materials you can work with. You can vary the cross-link density. You've got really good abrasion resistance. You've got excellent moisture resistance, and you can just basically make it as elastic as you want. And being a chemist, I've done that before, and I've worked with different types of coatings and copolymers, so I won't bore you with all that stuff. But basically what I do is I use one type of finish. That's all I do. And this is Bartley gel stain, but it's really not stain, it's clear, and they call it clear coat gel. It's kind of like the consistency of honey. When I put it on to bare wood, or if I put it on something like dyed wood, or in the case of the fumed wood, put it right over top. I use it as the first coat. I don't use anything else. And you put it on and you wipe it off, and you feel like, gee, what am I doing this for? Because I'm wiping it all off. It's almost like you polish it off and it's gone. The first coat you use quite a bit. By about the third or fourth coat, you hardly use any. And about that time, you're starting to build some finish, and it looks pretty nice. And that's the point where you tell yourself, well, I use so little and it goes on so fast, I could put a couple more coats on and be fine. This is satin. Because it's satin, even though it's kind of glossy, it's not real glossy, like a clear would be, so it doesn't look as plasticky. And I find if I put on as much as 8 coats, and then put some wax over top, That's all I do. I've used a whole bunch of different things, but this I like best. And you say, where do you get this? But you should already know what kind of box it comes in when you order it. It comes from Amazon.
What's the name of it again?
It's Bartley. Bartley, guy named Kenneth Bartley Boudry started a company back in the 70s where he made reproduction furniture and developed this type of finish. And then it went from just a non-urethane to a urethane in about early 1990s. And it's been pretty much that way ever since. There's a company called Seagraves Coating that bought the coating business. They have all different kinds of gel stains. In fact, the gel stains that they developed back in the 70s were used on cherry, and because they're kind of thick, they don't blotch as much. And that's one of the things that kind of got cherry more popular because people could finish it without getting the bad blotching. Yes.
How quickly does it dry?
They recommend 4 to 6 hours. What I find is that first coat that goes on, your wood is kind of rough. No matter how much you smooth it, it's still rough. You could use 1200 grit probably, and it's still a little rough. So it's going to fill those areas in. So I would suggest about 12 hours or overnight for the first coat. And then as you go farther, 4 hours, and then probably you can drop down to about 2 or 3 hours. It's not something you just put it on once and you're done. It's a situation where you finish something, and then you come back, you put a coat on in the morning, you put a coat on in the afternoon, you put a coat on in the evening, assuming you're like me and you are around the house a lot. But
Do you do it on the lathe or you do that?
either way. Sometimes I do it on the lathe, sometimes I do it off the lathe. If it's on the lathe, it's easy because I got an extra hand. I can reach in and get things. How do I put it on? I just use paper towels. How do I wipe it off? Paper towels. The only caution I would have is that, like all varnishes, it can be flammable. What I do is I just take the paper towels, ball them up, and put them next to the garbage can out in the garage on the concrete floor, so if they ever caught on fire, nothing would happen. And that way I can count the number of balls around the garbage can, and I know how many coats I put on. Otherwise I forget. Now, one thing, while I'm thinking about this, excuse me, but when you're dyeing, you've got water, and you're going to raise the grain. And one of the things I should talk about is when you raise the grain and you dye the wood, you need to smooth it out. You could just start finishing, but it's so rough that you would never put enough coats on to smooth it out. And then the question becomes, how much can you sand or use steel wool or whatever to smooth it down without going through the finish and getting some spots that are light? And that, I think, is just a trick, and I'm still not really good at it. But the other thing is the first coat that you put on a varnish or whatever finish, you can go over and smooth it a little bit more again, and maybe smooth a little as you go along and get things smoother. If you look at these two, if I feel it, I can tell the difference. Maybe you can't, maybe they both feel smooth, but this one is smoother than this one. And it just has to do with how much I use something like this 320 grit to go over it and smooth it down. And if you look at that one over there, my neighbor was talking to me. I was outside doing my sanding after I had put the dye on, and I was talking to him, not paying attention, and I sanded through a little place. I don't know where it is, but if you look, it's probably still there. So, sorry about that interruption. You had a question.
Yeah, you put all that nice finish on, then you finish it off with a coat of wax. What's the advantage of that? I mean,
when you finish something, you put that first coat of varnish on, it looks so much better. And then each coat starts to look slightly better to the point of diminishing return. And you think, oh, that looks pretty nice. And then you put the wax on, it's like, whoa, that much better. And I think Mike talked about wax. You hear these experts and they say, oh, you should use this carnauba wax that's really hard. No, you'll kill yourself because you leave little ridges when you put it on, and you have to just work and work and work. I find the easiest way is to take a very soft wax like Johnson's, put it on, and while it's still wet, they say wait for it to dry to a haze and buff it. No, take a paper towel and wipe off as much as you can. Then go back over after it's dried with a towel and you save yourself a lot of elbow grease. And
It's just the finishing touch that was the
it makes a huge difference, huge difference. You can take any piece that hasn't been waxed and wax it, it's like, whoa. Or you see these people that have antiques, okay, you don't want to mess with the finish. They just clean it up a little bit, put some wax on it, it looks beautiful again. Yes.
I'm looking for something that has some pretty high UV protection. Do you run into that at all? I noticed in our dining room, oak woodwork that had been down 20 years, where the light came in the window, there was a line right down through that, and there was several shades difference. And I've also made some lanterns for outside out of wood, out of copper, and ultraviolet just killing the finish, anything I put on.
Yeah, wood will darken naturally. In fact, if you have a piece of just raw wood, a board or something, and like you put a plane or something on top of it, and it goes in the light, that'll leave a mark. And sometimes you can sand and think it's perfect, and then when you finish it, that mark is still there. The finishes themselves, some are pretty UV resistant, things like acrylics, but it has to do with the chemical content. If they have aromatic content, benzene rings in the chemistry, it's not going to be as UV resistant. Some of the things like PVC is very UV resistant because it doesn't have any benzene rings in it, it's all aliphatic. So they have aliphatic coatings which are more UV resistant, but still your wood's going to continue to darken no matter what you do. Classic case would be the orange, I'm trying to think what the name of the Osage orange. That stuff is yellow. A lot of it's yellow. You can get a piece that's as yellow as can be, like a banana. A year later, it's going to be brown. It doesn't matter what coating you put over it, it's going to turn. Cherry, same thing, it's always going to darken. So I don't know what you do to prevent that, but the coatings can be made quite UV resistant.
I've used a Valspar marine finish, which has UV protection in it. It's like a polyurethane.
Yeah, they also put in some chemicals that absorb UV, and that helps to slow the process, but at some point, those are all sacrificial, and that goes away after a few years. Any other questions? Break time?